Welcome to our second session in the series of Future Generations, where we're going to be exploring how do we empower young people to deal with the challenge of climate change. Before we get started, there is a short video of about 5 minutes that we want to show you, featuring some young people to set the tone and scene of today's conversation. And then I will introduce the panel speakers afterwards when they start answering the questions. So can we play the video first?
We need to have leaders who can come up with a law which can favor environment, human beings, animals, also can favor the planet. We usually blame most of our leader and also the government because they're the one who are responsible.
Governments have influence over the regulations they put in place to regulate firms and corporations. Taking action and lobbying and emailing your MP is so important so that the people in Parliament and the people with power realise that young people like myself are invested in climate action.
Governments have to care about young people, and they have to take into account young people in all future decisions.
We are a force, and we are an important stakeholder group. There is more we can do, apart from, taking placard and walking to the streets to protest, apart from signing petitions. We can actually take this position of leadership to influence some of these policies, that we want to see happen.
Mock COP is an international virtual youth climate summit. It was to fill the void of climate action. They did regional caucuses and small groups discussing perhaps what policies they wanted to see as an outcome of the 2-week event. They unveiled the Mock COP26 treaty, which now in phase 2 of the campaign are trying to get some of the policies implemented in different countries around the world. For example, in the UK, we have Teach the Future, which is kind of like the main climate education campaign. And what we're hoping is that at COP26, a couple of people from Mock COP or Teach the Future will be able to go and discuss with education ministers on Zoom and then environmental ministers about climate change education, because we think it's obviously very important.
We were reached out to by the firm Equity Generation Lawyers, and they wanted to bring a class action on behalf of all young people around Australia and needed some named litigants. And so they reached out to School Strike for Climate because we were and still are the biggest youth climate movement in Australia. And so from there, we got in touch with lawyers, and we've been in touch with them ever since. And so we filed the case Sharma, and that one's through the courts forcing the Environment Minister to not approve coal mines because of her duty of care to young people. It's subject to an appeal, but that if it's held up, that this holds a very strong precedent that can be applied in cases in Australia, but we also hope around the world. Was the first case of its kind. And so that question hadn't been tested in a court of law, at least in Australia. And so the courts just hadn't had to answer that question. Legal litigation, legal activism is a strong way of activism and a strong way of forcing, because if you get the good outcome, you force change.
Africa is not a dumpster. Fossil fuel company, including Shell, they wanted to export the plastic waste material into Kenya. So here in Kenya, we have been able to ban plastic a long time ago. So we were able to tell them clearly why it's very bad for our government of Kenya to accept this plastic. The government were able to state very well that they are not going to accept such a deal.
I founded the Great to Green movement. We grew to about 6 of my friends, and that was when we decided to develop a theory of how we want to effect change. That was when we decided that we'll be mobilizing the collective power of youth and community to improve climate awareness and climate literacy, because we believe that climate literacy on a very fundamental scale will lead to climate action. 2 years down the line, we have a network of about 700 activists. Drop the concepts that these policymakers don't want to act. Make a case for why you want to see them Make it about action, what we can do, and not what we are not doing. Framing and narrative is very important.
Before you come up with a campaign, you need to come up with a clear message which you can send out to people to understand what you are fighting for.
Get your friends involved, get your family involved, get your school involved, get everyone in your community involved.
Turn urgency into creativity.
It's only through a mass movement of people that we can force change.
Make it about action, what we can do, and not what we are not doing.
Be yourself. Don't be like Greta. So you need to come up with your own way to see how you're going to fight, because we are the future generation and also we are the future leader.
Brilliant. And an introduction to set the scene. And I can see that William has just joined the conversation right at this precise moment, who's also joining us for the panel. So that's a perfect segue into the panel. William needs no introduction. He is one of the people in COP26 and beyond, and it was our intention to play that video as a way of introducing what William wanted to say, and we can maybe expand on it when we move into a panel discussion. What I want to do is give the floor to each and every one of the next climate panelists in this session on how do we empower young people to deal with the challenge of climate change. So Izzy, I'm going to come to you to start, where we'll give you about five minutes to share how you would answer this question.
Hello, everyone. I'm Isabella Gorini de Clare, and I worked on climate innovation for the last 10 years. And sustainability and environmental causes for the last 30 years. So the way I would respond to this question is I would say a message to myself when I was 20, probably. I would say to myself, be more assertive and don't go into a space in which you want to be seen, but rather go to a space in which you are perceived as making a contribution. I think the emphasis we have here, and even in this COP, is about what is happening amongst the leaders. And we forget actually the power we have as individuals and together. And this is because we have a setup, a system that is based on buzzwords and visibility and exposure. When we are not exposed, we don't feel seen. So I think if I would say something to myself is go to the spaces where you are seen as you are, instead of being perceived, instead of being exposed. Don't try to climb the ladder to be seen. This is what I would say to myself.
Thank you, Izzy. Find the places where you can be seen for the contribution that you want to make. Building on what one of the young activists said in the video there, don't be like Greta. Go and be yourself. Rob, I'd love to come to you. And how do we empower young people to deal with the challenge of climate change?
That's a huge question. Hi everyone, I'm Rob Connell. I am an assistant educator at an international school in Budapest, but I've done a master's in carbon management, and so I'm sort of trying to find a balance in between the two. So my perspective is from the role of education, and something that really struck me from the video was one of the individuals mentioned climate literacy will lead to climate action. And I think that's one of my mantras that I try to preach when I go to work every day at the school. So what I found is that when people think about how to tackle climate action, especially in the sort of business context, they sort of think about, okay, so what are the facilities I can tackle? What are the my fleet? How can I reduce the commuter distance and stuff? But at school is different. At school, the main source of emissions is the lifetime of the mindsets that these students have leaving education. And if we can teach these students that they can be empowered, give them climate literacy, teach them about climate change, not just in the context of a science and in an abstract manner, but as a all-encompassing force that reaches economics, has taught us things in history, it's a social issue, it's ethical. To see it as an issue all around, that's when students, in my experience, have started to understand that climate change is for everyone and not just for the people in charge making the decisions. So I think that one of the things that I want to get across is that we want to embed climate change into the curriculum in a more integrated manner and sort of make it a presence that should be there, like reading and maths and other things, and other sort of core subjects that you leave school knowing is understanding climate change. And so we need to tackle it at all ages. We shouldn't exclude young children just because they can't make a contribution to climate action. They go home, they talk to their parents, they have conversations, they can influence opinions. Also, they are capable of thinking of solutions as well. I teach 9 and 10-year-olds, and we've had a class on climate action and specifically flooding events, droughts. And one of our projects was come up with solutions, and they came up with some great things. They came up with, without knowing what a seawall is, they came up with a seawall. Without knowing that you can extract water from deep below the earth, they said, well, what if we mine lower? And all these things are sort of a medium to get literacy into the curriculum and get children thinking about how we can come together and tackle climate change in all aspects of life, not just understanding the greenhouse effect, but what can we do from an economic sense? What can we do from a household sense? And so that's why my perspective is all about bringing education in and involving students in that angle. There's some great schools, organizations that specifically talk to schools about how to do this. We just heard in the last session from Fuel Change. They're a great group. There's also Eco Schools, who we've been working with at our school. They've reached out to thousands of schools and been trying to integrate the climate change into the curriculum, and also Green School Alliance, and all of these I can highly recommend. I think they have resources that are for free and how to bring climate change into your classroom. But it's not just for the classroom. If you're just having a conversation with a child or with your team at work, these are great resources.
Thanks, Rob. And I love that reference to Fuel Change, talking about how to bring it into the education system, building on what was said in the last session there. Stuart, how do we empower young people to deal with the challenge of climate change?
Hello, I'm Stuart. I'm one of the volunteers with the Net Zero Nation or Net Zero Scotland community. And I did one of my degrees on geography. And through that degree, I studied community resilience and climate change. So through this, I found that there's a lot of grassroots initiatives. And I think that kids maybe aren't aware of them because a lot of these grassroots communities are run by parents or like older generations, but there's not a lot of kids involved. The only one was a plant garden in the Grangemouth in Edinburgh. So it's about, they got the community together and got this area where they can grow plants and crops together. And I think it's important to educate children of the resources, or young adults, or just resources that are available in their areas. It doesn't have to be about policy, it doesn't have to be about law. It can be about getting in contact with your local members and seeing what resources you have. Maybe there is a plot of land that's not being used and the kids can use it and they can grow vegetables and they can see the importance of doing this themselves and how they can reduce food waste and how they can reduce food miles. And it's not just about getting them involved and then they can take that back to homes to their families and then create change in their families. So I think education in school is very important, but then that has to translate back to the household. And I think teaching kids in the household is also very important. how they can be involved in things. And it's not just all about policy. It doesn't have to be with that. It can be many things, and it can come in loads of different ways. I didn't know about anything sustainable until I started uni. So until I was 19, I wasn't told anything in school. So I had to learn everything from my mom about growing crops, and because we did it in our garden, and I had to get the bus everywhere. I just thought that was normal. But I think you need to be taught at home, so then you can translate that into future things and be told about groups. There's loads of groups like transition groups, and I don't think it's really narrated towards young adults and children. And the most, I think one of the issues is that a lot of stuff that is narrated towards our generation is a lot of doom and gloom, and it's quite off-putting. If you're supposed to be empowered, all you're taught is, oh, it has to be down to the governments and the big companies that make a difference, and you have to think that you have to make this policy change to make a difference. And in reality, you can make changes in your community that make cascading effects that can lead out, and then you'll make a larger impact. So I think you need to almost not shield children from discouraging narratives, but they should be taught what they can do rather than what they can't do, and what is sort of the doom and gloom. I think that is what I would argue is the most important thing to encourage people, is to try and remove this doom and gloom narrative and implement here's what you can do, and it doesn't have to be massive. It can be a really small thing just for you and your community. That's what I think would be encouraging.
I appreciate that, Stuart. Coming back to the ethos of the Scottish Net Zero community there of finding positive action and optimism in the face of challenge. So I'd just like to, before we move into a group panel discussion, William, I'd just like to bring your voice into the conversation. And you came in just as the video was playing by way of introduction, and then you've heard kind of the initial conversation. So what's your responses and what's coming up for you as you're listening in?
Well, apart from apologizing for being late while struggling with technology due to sort of generational issues, I do think it's a two-way process. I don't think it's just how can we empower young people. I think it's how can they empower us, and how can we assist them in what they're doing. If I just give you an idea of what the people from the video have been doing in Glasgow this week, Kilo Uchendu, who's one of the activists. He was pictured this week handing over the Global Youth Statement from COI 16 to the President of the United Nations General Assembly. Jodie Bailey-Ho and Phoebe Hansen, at 1 o'clock today, they're doing a teach-in for the Department of Education, and they are going to be addressing the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Education on climate education and how important it is, exactly as Robert was saying, and to build that into the curriculum. So that's their ideas and what they should be built into the curriculum. So they are doing incredibly effective things. I think that what we're trying to do at COP26 and beyond is simply to try and fill in some of the gaps and give them some of the skills that they maybe don't have, teach them bits and pieces about the things we know a bit about, like law and engineering and education and jobs and things like that. But we're conscious of the fact that we're dealing with an incredibly motivated, incredibly keen generation that has got so much going for it that you really just need to try and find ways to help what they are doing and learn from them as well as contributing to what they are doing. And there's many different ways it can be done. I'm just sitting here at after the pandemic at the Strath Union in Glasgow, and yesterday I came along here to watch the Lego workshops they were running with the little children from the schools nearby, making sort of Lego workshops about climate change and polar bears and tiger habitats and things, and then coming into a session that was being run on an incinerator at Consett, and these little kids were asking really testing questions, again, as some of the other speakers here have said. So I think there's a lot that can be done. I completely agree with Stuart that we don't want to sort of demoralize children and make it feel it's all too frightening to join in. We just want to empower them and support them and find ways to back them up and to keep them connected with the best available climate science. I also think that's extremely important and will strengthen their case.
Thanks, William. I'm noticing you're nodding your head quite a lot there, Izzy, as you're listening into the conversation.
Yeah, I know I'm nodding a lot, and I notice that sometimes we are talking to the converters, and that's one of the troubles with climate change narrative that we have. How do we reach out to the ones who are in the fringes, or they don't take a side, or they feel marginalized to join the march because they don't feel they belong there? Where do they belong? So here I hear a lot of voices which are resonated with my heart and also with the work I do. But also I'm aware that, the climate awakening can be brutal, and it can be also, we don't have to picture a bad situation for the youth. Sometimes they know it better than us, they read, they are informed. So how do we support them while they discover all this information? Because the information is out there. And for me, as a climate activist and as a climate professional, I think the main element here in being together with people who are like-minded is really very much how do we support the climate trauma? We all had it. The eco-epiphany, we all had it. And so we went eventually into a space of empowerment. And so we need to be aware of the path we took, each of us, to go into that space of awareness, of consciousness, of empowerment, to replicate the miracle.
If I can just jump in, I just want to say that I totally agree. I think that one of the big sort of things that we need to, one of the biggest barriers to young people becoming empowered is the absence of exposure. I think that if they're not exposed to the information, to have that, you call it an eco-epiphany. I really like that. I think that's really good. Like, for example, myself, I wasn't really aware of the climate change, the severity of it, or that I could have a voice in it until my last year of my undergraduate degree in university. And now that narrative clearly needs to change. And I generally see myself as quite an informed person. And so I think that being able to give kids the exposure at a younger age will allow them to have that eco-epiphany and start generating those ideas, which then lead, it's like a gateway to empowerment earlier. And then the opportunities can maybe be fostered from there, and maybe that's up to the older generation to facilitate those. But I think that initial information is really key.
I think it's important just to also jump on the back of that is the narrative. Sometimes it doesn't always have to be solely climate change. I think it has to be very careful how you word it, because for a lot of people it might not be relevant for a child to know about it at that time. It might be telling them that, oh, if you do this, then there's also the benefit that there's this benefit. So growing your own food, you'll reduce your weekly shop cost, and then that helps them in general. Then they can tell their family and they can sort of spread this knowledge. And I think it's important to include all of the narratives in it rather than just keeping it solely as an eco narrative. And it makes it more relevant for younger adults and children to understand it rather than in a way that's something that's so huge and encompassing, such as climate change. And it's quite daunting. So you can tell them other beneficial factors of setting up a community group for public transport. They can say, oh, well, if you all get the bus, then you can get cheaper bus routes. And in reality, you're also helping them reduce fuel emissions. But it's trying to word it in a way that you don't have to word. It's not lying to them, but it's just wording that in a way that is more relevant to what they might be experiencing than just sticking the label on this climate change initiative.
And I'm really hearing you say it's about using the right language. And I like to talk about meeting people where they're at, rather than using confusing language. And I'm wondering if anybody else on the panel has something to talk about language and communication in terms of how we empower young people through language, exactly building on what Stuart said there.
I think, again, coming from the sort of educational point of view, I think that that's why sometimes exposing young people to education can also be a very scientific, educational issue that educators need to tackle, because when you're creating a curriculum and deciding how are we going to integrate climate change to 6 and 7-year-olds, I think that's when you sort of have to decide what language do you want to use, and what standards, what achievements, what goals are you setting yourself? Are you trying to, you're probably not trying to teach the greenhouse gas effect, but you're probably trying to talk about the importance of using less material to do something, because then you don't need to cut down as many trees, or something accessible. So I think definitely in the sphere of education, that's a huge question that you just asked.
If I can add something on that, we are working with Fuel Change that has been mentioned here to create a curriculum for integrating climate literacy into schools, and the aspect of gamification into landing proper elements of science. It is an element that is indispensable. So what I mean by that is, when we talk about language, one of the things we forget in the shambles we've been in the climate narrative is about defining the meaning and sharing them, having an agreement of these terms. The agreement on terminology is something extremely needed. It is so much needed in the net zero. The net zero definition, which is new to science, recently introduced by science, it is still misunderstood by a lot of the activists, and it is not yet landed in what it means into short-term goals. So we talk about net zero 2030, and actually net zero 2030 is quite accountable. There are short-term goals. If you go into the net zero tracker, you will find that these landmarks or benchmarks for achieving those goals are essential. So it's not that we set our course to a very far future for the net zero. We are setting the course to achieve something that is actually probably achievable, but if we are continuing arguing about the meaning, we are not going anywhere. And probably this is another element of empowerment. When we share meanings, we share values.
I also agree with that, but I just maybe add that there's quite a lot more consensus now about what the climate science is actually telling us. And I do think it's important to keep explaining to people that if 195 countries have signed off on the IPCC report on the physical science basis of climate change of the 9th of August, then it really does become a political issue, because you just need to keep bringing them back to the point of, you signed off on this, you endorsed the science. So the question is really, what is the political will to address it with the urgency that it requires? And I do think it's important that you ally the incredible energies and talents that these young people have with the extra ammunition of unequivocal science that's available to them now.
Thanks, William. What I'd like to do is I'd just like to open it up to some of the young people who are joining in and listening to the conversation to see if there's any questions, comments, feedback that you might have to share with the panelists.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that so far the conversation has been incredibly fascinating. I think that you've all made some incredibly valuable points. I just wanted to bring it back to the video that we started this session with, that talked more about a top-down approach with regards to the importance of law with climate change. And for now, it seems that you all seem to have a more bottom-up approach with regards to finding solutions for climate change. So I was just wondering if anyone could expand on that, if you see any value in maybe using both bottom-up and top-down, or if you think that one is more important than the other.
Yeah, if I could just very quickly deal with that. I mean, I think one of the things we were trying to get the young people to explore with the 4 young interviewers from the East End interviewing these 4 amazing climate activists was that the law affects all of us, and therefore, you know, the more it can be involve the whole of society. You have to take the whole of society with you, and therefore, if the whole of society adopts the law and supports it and understands it and sees it as relevant to real issues that are of concern to them, then it's more likely to stick as a law. And there's examples of that, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act in the US, where you basically, you know, society supports it because it understands it, it gets it, and it would like clean air and it would like clean water, and therefore they see that as relevant to them and they will support it. And that's the polling that different presidents have been getting. So what we're trying to say is, it's not some arcane mystery that has to be dealt with in a top-down way, as you put it. It's something that you should get these activists involved in. And in a way, you deal with the issues at a great big high level and all these people in the blue zone sort of negotiating away, but it all comes down to sort of local treatment of the law. It'll have to be laws on net zero by 2030, by 2050. What are we going to do about heating our homes? What are we going to do about transport standards and so on? And each of those is an opportunity for people to get involved in influencing what the law should be. So I think it's not a top-down approach. It should be a really an embracing approach which takes society with you.
I was wondering if I could just add to that, actually, because I think that the sort of inconvenient truth about a top-down approach is that generally there's not a lot of young representation at the top-down. And so I think young people, to make them feel empowered and to be quite realistic here, is that they have to come through the other channels. And so I agree with William that to sort of, it's almost more realistic to push society in the right direction and to have the laws then follow what society deems as important, rather than trying to restructure the way that the top-down works as to have young people involved there. And I'm not sure, and this is purely my assumption, but I'm assuming that most of the people at COP right now who are in the important main area and negotiating for the 195 nations, I can't imagine that many are under the age of 35. And so I think that probably speaks to the problem of empowering young people. And the trouble is that they need to feel not disenchanted by the fact that all the leaders of people in the power are older and the power is out of their hands, but we need to find a way to be able to push them to say, okay, we can't have that position be up to you, but how about we push society? How about we all push society in the right direction, and then the leaders will follow?
Can I just add, there's a lot of truth in that, and I very much agree with it. But I would just add that at COP26 in the Blue Zone on Friday, COP are leading a workshop. They're co-hosting it for education ministers and telling them again on the importance of climate education. So it's pretty phenomenal what they can do if they're given the support.
No, that's awesome to hear. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Izzy, you were just coming in with a comment there on it's not just young people, there's also very few young female leaders in the space as well. And I'd love it if you could just talk a little bit more to that point.
I mean, I'm biased to myself because I didn't see this until I was 40. Now almost 50, and I started to see it, but I still struggle because I was sitting in a panel a few days ago and I was the only female, and then somebody pointed out to me and I was like, oh, I didn't realize it. like, we take it for granted, even as women. We thought it was a very magnanimous attitude to think, okay, it's fine. I am the only woman. I'm grateful. So I won't address the problem. And so there is also this element that's very, very difficult to see it as a grown-up woman. You feel already privileged, you are there. But how do we claim the space for others? And I think that this is also very much about how to empower the silenced voices, which are the indigenous people, the youth, the marginalized fringes. How do we give space to them? And I think that this is the narrative where we can really create. I do feel is happening. Something's shifting, and I'm very positive about it. I don't know if I'm just delusional, but I do feel something is really happening. And I would like to frame it in this raising of consciousness. That might be kind of airy-fairy, but it is really impressive. And I've been part of probably spiritual movement aspiration for many years, but only now I've started to see something has landed. We have been given with COVID a fantastic opportunity to see the work we had was dysfunctional. So it wasn't COVID that gave us that dysfunctional world. COVID was an outcome of the dysfunctional world, but also it made us see the way our world was dysfunctional in, being socializing when wasn't needed, being extremely pushed to careers. All of this is gone and it cannot be replaced. I have this feeling, there is a push to replace it a little, but it's going to be difficult.
You make a really important point there about even the Indigenous voice and the marginalised voice. And this is a theme that's been coming out through a number of the conversations of how do we bring this down to the masses, so it's not a class issue, so it doesn't seem to be a privileged movement in terms of climate action. And as we opened the sessions for the Future series on Monday, we actually had Val Munduruku speaking to us, who is part of the Munduruku tribe, an incredible young female activist who was sharing her experience of what was happening to her tribe from living in Africa with the deforestation. And it was really powerful and quite sobering. I got off the phone and I said to my mum afterwards that it sounds as if it's genocide what's happening. They're not being excluded with voices. And it was really interesting you talking about that marginalized point, because then we had Bremley speaking to us live from IndCOP, pointing out how some Indigenous people had actually been removed from the proceedings within COP because they've been causing disruption. And I think it's an interesting point to just really highlight, how do we make this process as inclusive as possible in the conversations? As inclusive, coming back to that language of how do we empower young people? We need to hear all voices. We need to hear all language. I'm curious if there's any other questions from people who are listening. Jimmy, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, it was really in response to something Izzy said, but also your other contributors. When you're in education, I think your language is, and terminology has got to be one where it's inclusive, because, being an engineer, then you've already got this impression that engineering is a male-dominated world, but there are so many powerful lady engineers, or engineers who happen to be women, in that respect. And it's just, it's the use of the terms and what you're striving to engage and what you're wanting the youngsters to do. So, I mean, having heard what Izzy just indicated, that she was the lady there, is because I think, outside of, her world, the language is not encouraging to young ladies. I mean, it's great, we've got Nina and Juliet, sitting here, who are both involved in the business world because that's where their studies were. But I would be intrigued to find out what took them into that area, which was in fact initially a male-dominated thing. But yeah, it's just make everything diverse, inclusive, and equal. That seems to be an issue that all bodies are using at the moment. The diversity, equality, and inclusiveness.
Perfect. I just want to bring Nina and Juliet into the panel discussion on, as Jimmy's asked, to just kind of contribute and share, because you've got your hand up anyway.
Got to lower it again. The thing is, we did study that, and I was going to ask a question about that actually anyways. I did study carbon management, and I have, I finished my studies in August 2020, and I have still not managed to find a job in the sector that I actually want to work in. So it's been pretty hard to, in the end, actually get a job, even with a bachelor's degree, a master's degree that is relevant to the field. And I think that's also, so of course we've talked a lot about schools, or you have all talked a lot about schools, and I think it's so important to educate kids and like start early on. But we then have all those degrees that people can study. And I know that when I went off to do my master's degree, my parents and like everyone at home in Austria was like, oh, this is so amazing. It's such an important topic, and you'll have so many opportunities for jobs afterwards because it's so important and like it's coming up, and you can constantly read somewhere, oh, new jobs in like green energy are coming, or like so and so much money is put into creating new jobs. And this just hasn't happened. So I've been reading this for like 3 years now, but I still don't have a job in the sector that I want to work in. Even though I'm passionate about it and like I am volunteering in that sector, but yeah, it's just really hard to actually find something. So my question, I guess, for everyone also is, how do you think we can change that? How can we actually bring people who do have the education and do want to work and do something?
I'll just add a little caveat, because a lot of the positions that are posted online are senior positions. So you'll see a lot of like senior climate change officer or senior sustainability consultant, but there aren't that many entry-level jobs. And if there are entry-level jobs, it requires 5 to 7 years of experience, which we obviously don't have.
It's hard after uni.
William.
Well, just looking forward to the presentation we're going to give later on this afternoon at After the Pandemic. We're going to be talking about sort of jobs, and it's something we've done quite a bit on our blog and events and things. And it's kind of our understanding, and quite a lot of the experts who've spoken at our events have made this point to us, like Sadita Helm and things. This is if the energy transition works out like they're expecting, it's not just going to affect green jobs or something that's in a box saying it's a green job. It's going to affect all jobs. And I certainly see that in the law, I see it in sort of finance, I see it in all sorts of things. And therefore, it may be a bit long term for your immediate concerns, but I do think that you don't have to think yourself into a box of I'm only looking for a green job, because I think it's going to be something that is going to be relevant to every single profession. Every single skill is going to be needed to address this. And that's why I really like the sort of approach of something like After the Pandemic, because they bring in, not just the STEM subjects, but also the arts and every other aspect of the skills that are needed. So I think there will be more opportunities. It may not come along sort of, just immediately next Tuesday, but I think there will be new opportunities in every single profession.
Thanks, William. Does anybody want to build on that comment, or are you wanting to respond, Juliet?
I just wanted to add a little thing, because that is one of the biggest issues that we're going to have to face as societies as we move towards green measures and environmental measures that governments are implementing. We can't forget the people that are being left behind. Like, for example, in the Netherlands, where we're currently located, they're planning on removing over half the amount of cows and they haven't actually put in place a relief plan for the farmers. So that is like an issue that we do actually have to face as societies. We do need to take into account that there are people who will be losing jobs, and we need to find a way to be able to include them in this just transition in the future. And hopefully that'll include jobs for young people like us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's generally like it is, of course, it is clear that eventually there will be jobs created, but it is a bit, it is also, I feel like it does have to be acknowledged that it is hard for the people who are looking for jobs now. And it is also hard to say like, okay, well, it's great if you now seek for more education in something else, like in the arts or so, but it's like, I feel like it is a bit hard to say if you don't have that kind of education, if you do now have the climate change one, but you still can't find a job with that. It is, hopefully, obviously, like better outlook for the future. And I hope that lots of people will still be like motivated to study those kind of things and seek jobs in the area.
Brilliant, thank you. Can I just, because I noticed Izzy wanted to come in, William, sorry. So I noticed, Izzy, you had unmuted yourself earlier. I'd just like to come back to you.
Thank you. I mean, it might be non-meaningful, but I would like to recommend Nina and Juliet to, while they wait for a job, because of course the endeavor needs to be pursued, to put together some climate innovation ideas and go through accelerators, so start to learn how to build a business, because while you learn that, you develop a skill set that if you eventually decide to take a job, you will have the skill set to understand what the business needs and how to merge your knowledge with the managerial aspects. But also you might decide to start your startup, which is an element that is very empowering, in my opinion. I've seen and mentored so many innovators, and I've never seen people empowered like climate innovators. They are aware, they are making waves, and it's a great place to be.
Thanks, Izzy. I noticed, Jimmy, you've got your hand up. Again,
if you don't mind, is really Izzy took most of the words I was going to say, because listening to the girls, if they themselves can look at the language that they're using about their experience, their life experience, their study experience, and put that into the letter, short, sharp, and say, look, although you're looking for somebody with 3, 4, 5 years experience, I have that through these activities, and let them know that that you're aware of the aspects that you're actually working on, looking for climate solutions, because it's part of your psyche. It's inbuilt within you. And as Izzy just pointed out, if you start to look at that element, then you begin to see, here's an item that I can actually contact businesses that you're meeting, that you're investigating, that you're seeing in LinkedIn, and saying, I have an opportunity to assist you address this particular issue. In other words, it's what I said a couple of days ago. If you're up against a brick wall, take the bricks out, make an opening for yourself. You don't need a door, you don't need a window. You can actually knock the wall down.
That's a lovely way of putting it.
And I like it. So on the notion, I love it. When your back is against a brick wall, turn around, take the bricks out, and create your own opening. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Rob, do you want to come in?
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to sort of offer maybe a slightly different perspective, which I agree with everybody. By the way, I think seeking out innovation and doing things differently and fending for yourself to open a gap when there isn't one is true. But I think I feel that more should be done to, again, what the topic of this is empower young people. And I feel that sometimes when your back is against the wall, that's almost the opposite of what we should be trying to achieve. And getting bricks out to make your own opening, it feels against the sort of it's almost we're tackling the issue without addressing the bigger problem of more young people need to be empowered. And I think it speaks volumes that, and I hope we don't mind sharing this, but Stu, myself, Nina, and Juliet all are qualified in the sector, and yet none of us have a job in the sector, you know. So I think that more should be done to facilitate it. And I do appreciate that it's a humongous issue, but sometimes I think that maybe starting your own business and creating your own job is almost a sort of an alley that we go down because our backs are against the wall.
Yeah, it's almost it's quite disheartening because at every turn you have to fend for yourself, and you're constantly looking out for how you can manage yourself, and it's like you're never offered an olive branch or anything from any companies. It's always, like Juliet and Nina stated, you need so much experience, and no one's even willing to hear you out or offer anything to you. And it's like, if you have to start by yourself, then it's just like, okay, no one's out to help me because I'm a young professional who can't get any work. I have to do this myself. So it's quite disheartening when you have to constantly fend for yourself and look out. And when you're up against this wall, instead of someone being like, oh, here's a little door for you, you have to go, right, here's my own door.
Yeah. I feel like it's also because what Jimmy said earlier about like putting all the efforts into like a letter, pretty much, like that is unfortunately like what the application for every single job requires. So you do that anyways. But it does, like, also as Stuart said now, like it becomes quite disheartening if you like within 3 weeks send out 20 applications and you pretty much don't even get answers. Like you partially don't even get rejections because people don't want to take the time to let you know, like not even talking about feedback at all. But yeah, it just becomes quite disheartening if you like spend all your time and just nothing comes out of it.
And we know that the fact that we graduated at the peak of COVID also doesn't help.
Of course.
So yeah, we do recognize that. Sorry, Tabitha.
I was just going to say that I mean, many of us, I certainly have been in that position where they say you haven't got any experience and therefore we won't give you any experience, and you haven't got any experience, and you go round and round and round in circles. But you do get past it. It does change, and it does happen. You know, I think one of our contributors to COP26 was on sort of application number 111, and is now working for a fuel cell company. So it does happen. And, you know, the other one was sort of trying to get into sort of climate education, educational issues, and sort of was very much at that sort of phase of being told he hadn't got the education, hadn't got the experience, and therefore we weren't going to give him experience, and is now sort of just about to go and work for a Department of Education in another country. So it will change. It can change, and it does change, and you do get past that. And you just have to you have to have a large measure of persistence and grit. Don't let the process grind down your self-esteem. So don't let the process persuade it that there's something wrong with you, because it isn't. It's probably maybe there's something wrong with the institutions that aren't employing you because they haven't seen the opportunities yet, and you just have to keep going.
Brilliant. And I appreciate you finishing on those words, William, just as we wrap up there, recognizing that we're almost brushing up against bigger issues of systemic change within education and the world of work, and that's part of the transitions that we're facing there. Really grateful for everybody to have taken their time to join us for today's conversation. Thank you so much. And to everybody listening to the recording, I really hope that you have enjoyed the conversation. And we look forward to maybe seeing you again in some of the other sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Best of luck.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.